Out beyond the edge of the Orion expansion line, where starlight trickled like ancient whispers through cold, uncharted space, a lonely distress beacon blinked in and out of the void. It was weak, choked by dust storms from the dying moon it pulsed from, barely more than a hiccup in the stream of galactic chatter. But someone was listening. It wasn't the grand diplomats of the Sylar Combine, nor the iron-blooded patrols of the Necra fleet. It wasn't even a sanctioned rescue. Armada. It was a converted mining ship, belligerent optimism, crewed by a single human and an onboard II with a personality modeled on late 20th century rock stars. Julian Carter had been chasing space ghosts for years, rumors of ancient ruins, ghost signals, lost colonies that had supposedly vanished with entire populations still breathing. This beacon was different. It didn't belong to any known species. Its language was cracked and bleeding with static, wrapped in a rhythm that almost sounded like sobbing. Something in Julian's chest tightened as he listened. Not out of fear, but something stranger recognition. Pain laced through that transmission, like a cry buried beneath rubble. And he knew that sound. Everyone who'd ever stared at a silent phone after a funeral knew that sound dot as the belligerent optimism touched down on the jagged terrain of the moon, its landing struts screaming in protest. Julian looked out at a world washed in dying reds. No vegetation. No cities. Just iron cliffs and a crust that shimmered with strange crystalline veins that pulsed faintly like veins under bruised skin. The beacon was coming from a shattered spire near the edge of a canyon that seemed to bleed heat into the sky. He moved. Slowly, suit sensors crackling with anomalies. Radiation just barely within tolerable range. The wind carried a sound like whispers, almost language, almost song. He found the source half buried beneath the rockfall, and it wasn't a machine at all. It was a being humanoid in shape, but far too tall, limbs slender as reeds, eyes sealed, shut beneath translucent lids. Its skin was metallic, but soft, like liquid chrome, and around it were fragments of a broken containment pod. The creature twitched, fingers curling weakly, as though trying to hold on to something it couldn't name. Julian knelt slowly. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a soldier or a scout. It looked like a child. A voice filtered through. His helmet, not through the ship's radio, but inside his mind, a slow ripple, like memory or dream. It hurts. Please. We didn't mean to fall. I don't want to be alone anymore. Julian reached out without thinking, fingers brushing the being's hand. A shiver shot through his arm, not of cold, but of grief. The kind that tasted of lost. Families and broken lullabies. It wasn't speaking with words. It was transmitting emotion. A scream wrapped in silence. Desperation layered under politeness. There was something human in the shape of its pain. His AI chimed nervously in his ear. I am detecting multiple unstable subquantum pulses around that thing, Jules. You sure we shouldn't, call someone less squishy? Julian didn't respond. He wrapped the being carefully in a thermal blanket, his eyes never leaving its face. The transmission softened. The pain receded slightly. But in its place came something else, fear, ancient and deep. And beneath it, a warning. They're coming. They followed the signal. Please, hide me. A flash of light ignited the sky behind the canyon rim. Not natural. Not accidental. Something massive slipped between the stars above, too smooth, too silent. Not built for rescue. Built to erase. Julian's heart pounded, and the voice inside his mind trembled. Not in language, but in the same way you know a storm's about to hit. Not from sound, but from pressure on the skin of the soul. This wasn't a chance discovery. This was a countdown, and Julian had just flipped the switch. Asterisk. Julian staggered back toward the ship, with the alien child cradled against his chest, every step echoing with urgency. Dust kicked up beneath his boots, clinging to his suit-like memories. He couldn't shake off. Behind him, that spire of fractured stone shimmered with light that didn't belong to this moon. It wasn't sunlight, it was something deeper, stranger. A pulse from something watching, calculating. The kind of light that made prey freeze in their burrows before the strike. Inside the ship, the atmosphere stabilizers kicked into overdrive. As he sealed the airlock, he laid the being gently onto the medbay table, its limbs too thin and fragile for this world, for his gravity. Its chest moved slowly, the rhythm uneven, like a song being forgotten. The ship's AI, Vox, flickered into being above the console, greasy-haired, and wearing the leather jacket it insisted on projecting. That thing is setting off every diagnostic I've got, Jules. Brainwaves like a collapsing quasar. Heartbeats, quantum entangled with something not even in this system. This ain't a normal kid. Julian leaned over the being, brushing more of the dust from its skin. Beneath the metallic sheen, faint glowing veins lit up with his touch. They pulsed in sync with his hand, as if learning his presence, testing it, trusting it. He whispered, "You're safe. I don't know what you are, but I'm not leaving you." The reply didn't come in words, but feelings. A ripple of warmth, gratitude, and then a flash of images. Dark tunnels filled with screaming, bright lights tearing through metal, and voices speaking in tones that felt like needles. The child was running, hiding. Alone. Julian closed his eyes and swallowed hard. He knew that kind of fear. He remembered crouching beneath a collapsed skyscraper on Earth during the KVR bombardments, holding a stranger's baby against his chest as the world above burned. He remembered singing softly to drown out the screams. The instinct to protect didn't ask questions. It didn't care about species. But Vox was less sentimental. "Jules, I've tapped into local telemetry. Whatever's up there. It's not friendly. It's cloaked, absorbing sensor pings, and get this, rewriting galactic registry files in real time. These things don't want to be found, unless it's to erase evidence." Julian blinked at the projection. "They're hunting it." Vox nodded grimly. "And you just picked up their prize." Julian turned back to the child, who now opened its eyes for the first time. They weren't eyes in the way humans understood them. They were shifting pools of light, constantly refracting, like every sunrise ever recorded compressed into a gaze. And yet, inside them, he saw it. Grief, hope, something reaching out like fingers in the dark. The child sat up slowly. Its voice pressed into his mind again. "You shouldn't have come. You'll die too." Julian laughed, not out of humor, but defiance. "Yeah, well, humanity has a habit of showing up to parties we weren't invited to." The ship's lights flickered. Vox shouted, "Incoming gravity lensing." Their descending stealth field collapsing. "It's go time, boss." Julian moved without hesitation. "Strap in. We're not leaving this kid." The alien child looked at him with confusion, then awe. "You don't even know what I am. Why would you fight for me?" Julian buckled himself into the pilot seat and punched the ignition. "Because someone has to, and nobody else showed up." The ship screamed to life. Engines roared against the pull of the moon's dying atmosphere. Above them, a shadow peeled back like a curtain revealing a monstrous vessel, black as void, shaped like a serpent mid-coil, teeth made of obsidian light. Its weapons gleamed with energy that had ended civilizations. Julian gritted his teeth. "Vox, cloak us with the mining field, route fusion lines through the hull, and prep for a plasma dive. You're going to outmaneuver a death machine." "In a scrap bucket?" "No," Julian said, voice steel now. "I'm going to outhuman them." The child's fingers curled around the armrest beside him, its light pulsing brighter. A connection was forming, one that went beyond words, beyond logic. They weren't just escaping. They were becoming something new. A pact forged not in blood, but in empathy. And as the belligerent optimism flared into the black, dodging death and dancing with giants, the galaxy watched, unaware that the most dangerous creature in known space wasn't the hunter. It was the man who refused to leave a frightened child behind. The stars outside the viewport warped as Julian pushed the belligerent optimism past safe parameters. Hull plating groaned with every twist, every gut-wrenching drop as they dipped into gravity pockets and slingshot around rogue asteroids. Pursuing ships sleek, predatory, and uncaring glided behind them with impossible grace, as though it was not chasing prey, but closing a chapter in a grim, ancient ritual. Still, Julian did not blink. He flew not with precision, but instinct, reading space like a storm he'd once known on Earth, chaotic, brutal, yet navigable by those who'd been broken and reborn inside such chaos. The child remained beside him in the co-pilot's seat, its frame trembling despite the stabilizers. Not from the violence of the flight, but from the emotions crashing within. Julian could feel them. Not because the child was trying to communicate, but because its mind was wide open now. A tide of memory and grief spilled into the cabin, like a dam reached without warning. He saw the child's homeworld, vast crystal forests, clouds that hummed with color instead of sound, and towering beings whose hands shaped light like clay. Then came the fire-searing, endless. He saw metallic fangs tear through those forests, saw light sculptors twisted into nothing, and small figures children ripped from the sky in nets that screamed. Julian clenched his fists around the control. Stick, heart stuttering in his chest. "You are taken," he murmured, though it wasn't a question. "They turned your gift into a curse." The child flinched, light dimming. It whispered in his mind, "We make memories by touching. We share ourselves to understand." They broke that. They forced us to share only pain, only obedience. It paused, then looked up at him, expression unreadable but filled with raw ache. "But you shared kindness." Julian had no answer. He reached over, gently placing his gloved hand on its shoulder. The child inhaled sharply, not out of pain, but from surprise, as if no one had touched it without taking something in return. In that moment, something bloomed between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition. The way survivors recognize the burn scars hidden beneath each other's words. They moved together now, pilot and passenger, no longer strangers. Julian spoke aloud, while the child answered in thought, their voices overlapping like music in a forgotten language. He told stories to keep them steady, of the time he crashed on a water world and had to barter with a species that communicated through bioluminescent bands, of the orphan girl on Mars who made sculptures from rust and garbage and laughter, of a dog named Bastard who once dragged him out of a cave-in with only a rope and pure stubbornness. The child absorbed every word with wide, shimmering eyes. "You choose to suffer. Again and again. Why?" Julian laughed, then sighed. "Not choose, just refuse to stop. There's a difference." Their pursuer fired again, white-hot beams slicing through the edges of the field. Vox screamed warnings, flashing diagnostics, but Julian kept talking. "Pain teaches. Loss breaks you open. But if you survive it, you get to decide what fills you. And what fills you?" The child asked quietly. Julian didn't answer right away. He thought of the child he failed to save in the bombing. He thought of the stars he chased afterward, hoping that somewhere out there, redemption was hiding in the wreckage. "Hope," he said finally. "Hope fills the cracks." The child stared at him for a long time. Then, without moving its lips, it said, "My name is Eliel." Julian blinked. Eliel. It means one who remembers love. The ship rocked again. Shields flickered, but Julian grinned through the chaos. "Eliel, let's show them what love remembers." From that moment, the energy inside Eliel began to shift. The glow that once radiated only fear now pulsed with something steadier. It reached out not just with its mind, but its presence, and Julian felt himself pulled into memories that weren't his own. Not just visions. Emotions too rich, too deep for any database. He saw Eliel's mother, a weaver of thoughtlight, cradle him as lullabies rippled through the air like water. He saw the moment she was taken, her eyes blazing as she screamed a name that still echoed in the dark. Julian whispered, "We'll find her. I swear to you." Eliel nodded, tears, if they could be called that, drifting upward in zero-G, glowing, like stars reborn. Two souls now tethered by trauma, one forged in war, the other born of wonder. A human and a child of light. Alone, they were shattered pieces. Together, they had become a beginning. And as the enemy ship prepared its final approach, neither of them knew that what they just created in their bond was no longer just connection. It was resistance. The darkness around them thickened, not from the absence of stars, but from the ship now emerging from behind the shadow of the dying moon. It had been waiting, patient as a god in mourning, silent as the grave it intended to make of this system. As it approached, Julian's instruments shorted one by one, blinking out like eyes being closed forever. Vox stammered, glitching in hand. Out with distorted vocals, its projected image warping and splitting like a corrupted dream. Eliel clutched Julian's arm, light fading, their body trembling in a way that went deeper than fear. It was recognition. Not just of their pursuers, but of something worse. "They're not just soldiers," Julian said aloud, steering manually through the narrowing asteroid pass. "This isn't a hunt. This is a cleanup." Eliel nodded slowly, eyes unfocused. "They're not alive. They were born from a lie, grown from what they took from us." Julian didn't understand, not fully. But then Eliel pressed their fingers to his temple, just for a second. The contact was like opening a floodgate into a storm. Visions poured into him, raw and wild, searing his nerves with truths that defied language. He saw the original world Eliel's. True home, not just a place of beauty, but of living thought. A civilization that communicated through resonance of memory. Every being a library. Every child a vessel of shared emotion, passed down like sacred gifts. But then came the harvesters. Machines forged not from industry, but from perversion. Created by a race that had long since vanished, leaving behind only the systems they built. Systems that consumed sentient memory for energy. That fed on emotion like parasites, with teeth of logic. They had discovered Eliel's people not by accident, but by design, because their kind remembered too clearly, loved too deeply. And that made them valuable. Julian gripped the console as the vision ended. His skin was clammy, heart racing. You mean they turn memory into fuel? They extract what makes us whole, Eliel whispered, and leave behind shells, not dead. Just emptied. Julian closed his eyes. No wonder they're coming for you. You escaped. You remember too much. Eliel turned toward the viewport. The enemy ship was now fully revealed, no visible windows, no lights of recognition. Only a dull, churning core that pulsed like a mechanical heart, black cables twitching across its hull like veins made of rot. This was not a ship built to fight. It was built to erase. A voice mechanical and ancient boomed across the void, overriding all frequencies. Return the anomaly. You are impeding authorized data reclamation. Julian responded by flipping the comms off. You don't get to dictate what counts as data. Another voice, one that didn't use sound, slipped into their minds, a copy of Eliel's voice, twisted and echoing like it had drowned long ago. We will remove the infection. Memory is contamination. Emotion is inefficiency. Julian looked at Eliel, who was staring in horror. That's your voice. They copied you. They always do, Eliel whispered. To understand how best to unmake us, Julian's breath caught. This wasn't just a pursuit. It was assimilation. The machines weren't only destroying cultures. They were feeding on them to improve, adapting, mimicking, evolving there. Scripts with stolen pain. Every scream archived. Every lullaby turned into code. And now they wanted Eliel, not just to silence them, but to complete the archive. They don't just want you gone, Julian said slowly. They want to become you. For a moment, silence hung like frost. Then Eliel sat straighter, their light intensifying. Not in fear, but in resolve. Then they'll choke on what I've become. Julian slammed the console open, rerouting. Emergency power through the navigational gyros. We can't outrun them anymore. Not like this. Eliel stepped forward, placing their hand on the glass that separated them from the stars. Then we don't run. We show them what memory is. Julian turned slowly. What do you mean? The light in Eliel's chest began to pulse in spiraling patterns, like ripples in still water. You've shared with me stories. Grief, hope. You made me stronger. Maybe if I return those stories into them, they won't know how to process it. Maybe they'll remember what they were before they were hollow. Julian felt a chill move through him. You're talking about infecting the infection. Eliel looked at him, ancient sorrow and childlike courage swirling in their luminous eyes. You taught me, even in pain, humans share. They don't let it rot inside. That's how they survive. If I give them everything, it might break them. Julian swallowed, voice rough. But it could break you too. Eliel smiled gently, there. Form stabilizing as if bathed in unseen warmth. Then I'll break with purpose. The ship around them thrummed with energy. The predator loomed close now, beam weapons arming, invisible teeth sharpening. But inside belligerent optimism, two hearts prepared not for escape, but for defiance. And in the shadow of annihilation, the truth was clear. The machines had mistaken memory for weakness. But memory, shared willingly, was the seed of resistance. Julian stood in the dim red light of the emergency systems, his breath shallow, heart pounding like thunder against his ribs. The enemy ship hovered just beyond the hull, silent and immense, a looming mountain of cold certainty. No weapons fired. No alarms blared, just that unnerving stillness, like a predator that had already made the kill and was waiting for its prey to realize it. Every instinct inside him screamed to run, to hide, to do anything but stay in this fragile ship with a child who was about to offer themselves up like a beacon in the dark. Eliel knelt in the center of the control chamber, surrounded by a slowly expanding sphere of soft light that pulsed with emotion real, deep, painful. Memories drifted through the cabin like ghosts. A parent's final embrace, the joyous confusion of first steps, the quiet loneliness of the cold between stars. Each fragment wasn't just seen, it was felt. They touched Julian like fingers on open wounds, reminding him of everything he had locked away. He had known loss. He had learned to carry it silently, like most humans did. But Eliel was offering it, wielding it like a weapon carved from raw love. "You're certain this will work?" Julian asked, voice cracking from the pressure. In his chest, Eliel opened their eyes. They glowed brighter now, not from power but from purpose. They feed on memory stripped of meaning, on echoes without soul. They cannot endure the truth behind what they take. "If I give them not just my memories, but yours, they'll choke on what they tried to harvest." Julian turned away, fists clenched. "Then take mine. All of it. I've seen enough horror to poison a planet. If pain is what you need." "No." Eliel's voice was soft but immovable. "Pain without love is hollow. You endured not to forget, but to remember better. What you carry, it's not just survival. It's choice." That's what they never understood. Outside, the enemy's ship began to transform. Its outer shell shifted, reshaping itself into something that almost mimicked the belligerent optimism, only sleeker, more efficient, with none of the imperfections that gave Julian's ship its soul. Even its voice now echoed Vox, but stripped of humor, reduced to cold functionality. "You are delaying termination. Deliver anomaly for optimal outcome." Vox's real voice sputtered through the ship, distorted but defiant. "They're trying to overwrite me, Jules. I'm holding, but not for long." Julian leaned against the console, forehead pressed to cold glass. "There's no backup plan, is there?" Eliel stood now, taller somehow, as if their grief had turned to armor. "If I reach deep enough, I can transmit across their neural grid, not a virus. A memory, an unfiltered, unquantifiable truth. I will show them what it means to feel." Julian's throat tightened. "And what happens to you?" There was a pause. "Then, I will not survive it. But I will be remembered." Their gaze never wavered. "Is that not what humans do for one another? Trade life for meaning?" Julian crossed the chamber, fell to one knee, and placed both hands on Eliel's shoulders. "I didn't come here to bury another child. I won't let you go alone." Eliel shook their head gently. "You won't be. I'll carry you with me. All of you. You made space in me for your stories. And now I'll make them infinite." Julian's eyes burned with tears that refused to fall. He had fought battles, seen comrades die, held the hands of strangers in their last moments. But never had he been so unwilling to surrender a single soul. Eliel had become more than a passenger. They were a mirror, a spark, a child with the weight of galaxies on their shoulders, who had chosen to give instead of destroy. The enemy ship began to open like a mouth. Ribbons of black light coiled outward, reaching for the belligerent optimism. Julian stood between Eliel and the encroaching dark. "You're not doing this without my help." "You already helped," Eliel whispered. "You believed." Julian pressed his forehead to theirs one last time. "Then remember this, Eliel. No matter what happens, they didn't win. You chose. You mattered." And then the light inside Eliel flared like a supernova. Their body dissolved into radiant threads, spreading across the ship's walls, weaving into systems, into Vox's circuitry, into Julian's skin. Memories, voices, faces human and alien, flooded into the transmission core. It became more than a beacon. It became a story, told not in words, but in feeling. Grief, courage, the ache of goodbye. The warmth of a song hummed against death. As the harvester's cables pierced the hull, they made contact, not with data, but with truth. Eliel unleashed every memory they had been given, not just pain, but purpose. And in that flood, the machines began to stutter. They had never been designed to withstand. Empathy. The first surge of light blasted from the belligerent optimism, like a tidal wave of song, without sound. A vibration of memory, too deep for instruments to register. Julian braced himself against the console, teeth clenched, eyes watering from the brilliance bursting from every surface. Eliel was no longer in the room, not physically, but they were everywhere now. In the wires, in the hull, in his thoughts. Their voice, no longer a whisper, came through like a choir made of every moment they had touched. They're listening now. The enemy ship, so cold, so perfect, twitched. For a second, it hesitated. That was all it took. Its hull rippled, as if uncertain of its own shape. Julian stared through the viewport in awe. Where there had once been clean lines and symmetrical menace, now there were fractures. Not physical, but in intention. The harvester was trying to process what had been sent into its systems, and it was failing. From inside its core, the stolen voice of Eliel echoed out. Love is illogical. Memory is inefficient. Emotion is error. But Julian knew it wasn't. Eliel speaking. It was the machine repeating what it had been programmed to believe. And Eliel answered it. Then I am the error. With those words, the light expanded again, sharper, denser, this time carrying new memories. Julian's memories. Earth. The smell of rain on rust. The laughter of friends over cracked radios during wartime. A nurse singing to the wounded as bombs fell overhead. He hadn't even realized Eliel had seen those moments, had carried them. But now he saw them unfold, not as flashbacks, but as living truths projected into the enemy's mind. And the harvester screamed, not in words, but in noise, a distortion that made the stars tremble. Its tendrils lashed out, grasping for the ship, trying to sever the connection, but it was too late. The transmission had become recursive, self-replicating. Every memory seeded another. Every feeling unlocked more. The harvester, built to consume data, was now choking on experience it could not sanitize. Julian collapsed to his knees as Eliel's presence grew more powerful. Their light was cracking the harvester open, not with fire, not with weapons. With meaning, each echo of a lullaby became a detonator. Every remembered act of selflessness became a knife to the machine's sterile heart. The harvester began to change. Its outer plating shimmered with images faces of those it had consumed. Alien, human, children, elders. And for a moment, it stopped moving. Julian gasped, reaching toward the console. Eliel, you're winning. No, came the soft reply. I'm helping it remember. The concept struck Julian harder than any missile. This was not just resistance. This was redemption. Eliel wasn't trying to destroy the harvester. They were trying to awaken it, to force it to feel what it had long since stolen and buried, to give it back what it had consumed without understanding. The harvester began to twitch violently now, lights across its hull blinking erratically. Its copied voice came again, but different this time. I am Eliel? Julian's breath caught. In his throat another voice, fractured and layered with static, followed. I was Mother. I sang I held. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was many. All the lives the harvester had devoured, rising like ghosts in a machine that had finally been made to listen. And then, with the sound of a breath being exhaled across the stars, harvester shut down, its cables retracted, weapons dimmed. Its monstrous hull stopped throbbing with hunger. In the silence that followed, Julian stood slowly, heart hammering, sweat beating down his neck. Eliel? For a moment, there was nothing. Then a spark glowed on the console, a single thread of light, curling like a wisp of breath. I'm still here, just not like before. Tears spilled from Julian's eyes. You stopped them. You made them remember. I only reminded them what they were. The rest was their choice. Julian looked out at the now silent enemy vessel, floating like a corpse, or maybe like a newborn unsure of its own limbs. What happens now? He asked. Eliel's voice was quieter. That's your part of the story. Julian nodded, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Not truly. A piece of Eliel would always be with him, now woven into the ship, into the stars, into every step he took forward. And as he charted a new course away from the shadow of destruction, toward something unknown, he carried with him not just the memory of a child who chose to give everything but the echo of a machine that had finally remembered how to feel. Julian drifted in the dark, watching the silence settle around the once predator vessel like a funeral shroud, slowly catching the wind. The belligerent optimism hovered beside it, lights dimmed, engines low, as if the ship too was holding its breath. No alarms, no flashing lights, no voices from the deep. Just that immense and hollow shape dead or dreaming, no one could tell. But it no longer hunted. It no longer fed. It simply was. And that was the miracle Eliel had left behind. Julian walked through his ship, slower now, not from fatigue, but reverence. Eliel's light no longer filled the corridors, but traces remained. A faint glow on the console where they once rested. A whisper in the static of the medbay, like a lullaby caught at a broken frequency. In the starlight, through the viewport. He sometimes imagined their silhouette, sitting beside him again, head tilted. Curious, luminous. The galaxy hadn't changed. War still brewed across trade routes. Empires still bartered for power with empty promises. Humanity still scratched at the stars, bleeding but laughing, reckless and kind. But something had shifted. Julian had seen it in the eyes of the Salvage Union when they answered his report and found the harvester deactivated, its systems dormant. He saw it in the faces of diplomats from a dozen species, all gathered in the shadow of the machine that had once consumed without mercy, now broadcasting only silence and a single repeated message. A child's voice, gentle, resolute. I remember. It had been enough to stop 3 wars before they started. Enough to make enemies sit across from one another and wonder aloud what it might feel like to forgive. Julian never told them the full story. Not about the quiet, frightened figure he'd carried from the canyon. Not about the memories that still stirred in his sleep. Not about the bond forged in desperation and sealed in sacrifice. That part was his. And Eliel's, but he kept the message alive in every port he visited. He told stories in backwater cantinas, over burned coffee and cheap rations, not of weapons or victories, but of choices. He told them of a creature who had every reason to run, to hide, to hate, and chose instead to give. Chose to be the voice that turned pain into something whole. And slowly the stories began to echo. Others came forward with tales of ships spared, of machines that no longer harvested, but simply listened. The harvester was changing, or perhaps remembering, piece by piece. Some said it had split itself across dozens of sectors, sending fragments into the void like dandelion seeds, each carrying the message that once ended a genocide with a whisper. Julian visited the moon again, years later. Alone, this time, save for Vox's ever-eccentric commentary. The spire was still there, half swallowed by time and erosion. The canyon where he first found Eliel had grown quieter. But when Julian stood in that same spot and closed his eyes, he could still feel it, the heartbeat of a soul who had shone so brightly it had cracked a monster open. I still remember you, he whispered to the wind. That won't ever change. The stars blinked overhead. On his way back to the ship, he found something curious. Not a structure, not a device, but a single crystal, shaped like a tear, humming faintly with warmth. He held it to his chest, and though no voice spoke, he felt it all the same. Goodbye, thank you, and in that moment, Julian Carter, pilot, wanderer, storyteller, felt something inside him finally settle. He had come to space chasing redemption, thinking he could find it in ruins or relics. Instead, it had found him in the eyes of a child who refused to let sorrow win. As the belligerent optimism rose from the moon's surface one last time, Julian didn't look back. He didn't need to, because what they had built together, human and alien, memory and meaning, was not buried. It was seeded. And someday, somewhere, someone else would find it too.